This is the recorded lecture 7 for Safety 388. As you can see on the screen, I have the Canvas site up right now, and this is the quiz that I want you guys to complete on your own and then bring to class next, and we'll grade it. There are 5 questions. You can either print it off or you can just write it on a sheet. This refers to the content from Lecture 6, so please refer to Lecture 6 content for completing this quiz. Now, I'm going to go over the PowerPoint very quickly, and then I want to show you a sample of items here, work I've done in developing a safety program for people. So here is the PowerPoint. And I'm not even going to turn on PowerPoint. I'm just going to quickly go through it. There's a little bit of a review. Going all the way back to Lecture 1, you should remember this slide, that the functions of a safety professional or the duties of a safety professional as per ANSI Z 590 to anticipate, identify, and evaluate hazardous conditions. Number 2, to develop control strategies, methods, procedures. Then to implement and administer the hazard controls, and finally to measure and audit and evaluate the effectiveness. So these are what we're supposed to be doing, really in line with the General Duty Clause, providing a place of employment free from recognized hazards. In Lecture 2, referred to this really cool flow chart from the Oakley book in Chapter 6. I got the pages listed. The goal of causal analysis is to find all the causes, including the systemic causes, not just the immediate superficial causes. And then I provided levels of accountability and benefits. So we select the analytical technique that best fits what we're trying to accomplish. And in the form of in an accident investigation, we're really trying to get to that cause so we can prevent it from happening again. Lecture 3, we really got into the analytical approach. We had to define the problem, gain knowledge, analyze facts, develop corrective actions. And then after that, we're supposed to evaluate the effectiveness and then go right back to it. This is it should be a continuous loop, not so much this linear model we have here. Analysis, the systemic and exhaustive process used to determine what is known about an accident by examining all known facts or circumstances surrounding it. I'm hoping, and as you read these here, that you're starting to detect, we're kind of saying the same thing over and over again. From Lecture 6, in preventing accidents, actually this may have been Lecture 5, but in the Oakley book, the ultimate purpose of conducting accident investigations to preventing future accidents. Yeah, that would be Lecture 5. Documentation is an important part of the process. I talked about that actually in Lecture 6 when I was referring to my training as an engineer. The objectives of an accident investigation are, to really figure out what's going on, and what we learn from it is very important. Here we've got the accident pyramid. I believe this is Frank Bird's and not Heinrich's. And then as far as the hierarchy of controls, if we cannot eliminate a hazard, if we're going for substitution and below, it must become part of the safety program because there are going to be future exposures. And as we go down here, like PPE, there is still exposures occurring, and now it's kind of luck whether it works or not. Though sometimes it can be effective. I shouldn't completely discount its effectiveness. Also in Lecture 6, I talked about the work system model. This is my approach to safety, so that if somebody gets hurt, if we just focus on the person, we're completely ignoring all the factors that have provided the person with what they deem as work expectations, what they deem as acceptable practice, what they deem as the correct tools or possible tools to use. And so we need to look beyond them, because if we leave this part alone, the system elements alone, and we just focus on the person, it's likely you could pluck another person into this and they would probably act the same way because they're being influenced by these things. And it's not a constant influence. These are constantly in flux. And so there are persistent and non-persistent hazards that we may seem as being a person issue, but it's not. Now let's shift gears, leading up to what this lecture is all about, and that is, what does a safety program look like? And some people think it's a bunch of binders. Well, the binders are really our documentation as safety professionals for the evaluations we've done, the information we've collected, references, all that stuff. That's all of our work. But what it really comes down to is this is what we'd show OSHA, because if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist when it comes to OSHA. We cannot purchase a safety program. If you remember my philosophy, it has to be built from within. It's earned. A good safety program is earned, and it's not what's on the shelf. It's what we deliver to the workers. It's what we institute in the workplace that really is what the safety program looks like. One mistake that a lot of beginner safety people or part-time safety people do is they just recite an OSHA standard. They just copy or map based on what the standard says, and that's not what it's designed to do. It's designed to be a reference point, applied when you need it. But you're attempting to identify hazards. You're attempting to control, eliminate them. If you can't, then you build a program around it. That's what it really comes down to. But the program is what you see on the floor, not what's in a binder. So here, I'll let you go ahead and read all this. This is me kind of putting it all into, a list of the things that need to be done in order to make a program. But what I'd rather do is kind of show you some of the work I've done in the past. Now, when you go to the OSHA website, actually anywhere, you're going to read what makes a successful safety program. And really, it goes back to 1978. There was a series of studies done by a bunch of NIOSH researchers, Harvey Cohen, Mike Smith, and they came up with this list based on a paired study, which was really interesting at the time. What I want to point out is that here it says that better housekeeping and cleanliness tended to mean a company was safer. And I just read in one of the OSHA handouts that it said, yeah, you got to keep things clean. But when I talked to Smith about this, what he said it meant is, well, workplaces in which workers felt like they had more ownership over their work, they felt more pride in their work, they kept their workstations cleaner and more organized. That's what this means, and not saying that housekeeping, you force housekeeping onto people that all of a sudden your company will be safe. And what you saw to hear, this is really what we're going to be operating in now, that an effective safety program has management, leadership, has employee participation, hazard ID, hazard elimination, training education, program evaluation, and then medical management, which you'll learn more about when we get into 483. Here are some these are just references of where a lot of this stuff came from. I tracked it over time. Doesn't go back too far. 78 was the paper by Smith. Cal OSHA has I2P2. This is another good reference, but it's not required anywhere outside of California. But let's look at some examples of things that I've done. Now, the very first thing I'm going to point out is that back in 2009, I was contacted just completely out of the blue by Extreme Makeover Home Edition. I believe this is an ABC television show, or it used to be. I think it's off the air now, but you can still catch reruns. They had chosen a homeowner in the area, but they couldn't tell me where. They couldn't tell me when it was going to start, and they couldn't tell me anything, basically. But they said that I was recommended by several people in the area to head up all the safety efforts for this television show. It's going to be a 7-day event. So I said yes, and so I assembled a bunch of volunteers to do safety work. They gave us blue T-shirts to kind of stand out and yellow hard hats, and I had at least 2 safety professionals on site at all times to supervise the work that was going on. And what I did is I took more of an assistive or a servant approach to this, where we weren't going around and telling people, hey, you're doing this wrong, I'm going to get you in trouble. We said, okay, this is what needs to be done, let me help you out. And after 7 days, there were no serious injuries. There were a few minor ones, but this was the home pre, and this is the home post. It's really, really nice, and so it was a good experience. I wish I had documented more of it, but I was just under the weather, still doing the work there. So I gave you a bunch of things to look at for this lecture, and I'm going to quickly go over them. I put them all in PDF so that it's easier for you to look at. Now, here's the Small Business Handbook. This is OSHA 2209. And this is a good reference for people who really don't know much about safety, but I want you to take a quick look at it, because you're going to see a lot of the similar things that we've been talking about, but maybe almost a too much of a basic language, but there's good information here. Take a look at it. This is a much better document. This would serve you better. This is a little bit more advanced, and this came out not too long ago. And you'll see some similar things that I had brought up before in here. They justify safety. It's interesting. It looks pretty. It talks about management leadership, worker participation, hazard identification and assessment. Oh, what I miss? Hazard prevention and control. Look, they've got the hierarchy control pictures here. I think I got it from somewhere like Google. Education and training, program evaluation, and then they've got the communication with contractors and stuff. I think medical management is something that I think this comes naturally out of everything else. I think the medical management requires itself to be set apart. Here, this is just recommended practices, and what's interesting is what they did is they took these elements and then they tried to identify different parts of standards that call this stuff out. What I found kind of interesting is that they don't put under the record keeping, under 1904, hazard identification and assessment. It's there. It's part of the 301. It's got a column under the 300 log. So I think they kind of missed that one a little bit. But it's interesting. It's just things you can refer to. Now let's look at a sample. So back in 2006, I was asked to do an audit. Just a friend had asked me, and because they had been cited by OSHA. So, the first thing I do with any of my clients is I sit down with them, ask them, what do you want out of this? What's your goal? And typically they don't have a safety professional, so they are just lost, and they want to get a foothold on what do we do to build a program? What's our safety picture look like? And so I do an injury analysis. Oh, I guess I had done one previously. I guess I did it 2005. This must be a follow-up. I did an injury trend for them. This looks like log data. Here I'm just doing the classifications of it so we get an idea of what's going on. So I always try to be very positive at the beginning. Based on the work I'd done prior, they had a follow-up inspection with 0 citations, so they were pretty happy. And they wanted to, one, celebrate what they had accomplished, and then two, they wanted more. They wanted a new list of to-dos. And so I went through and gave them another visual audit. And you see, I always try to provide pictures and discussion points on what they can do. And for you guys, look at this stuff, because this may be things that you can learn from. If we were face-to-face, I spend more time talking about it, but this video software I'm using is not the most reliable, and so I'm going to try to cut it kind of short. 2 years later, I came back, and again, similar steps, similar things, just trying to give them recommendations on what they can do to fix or to continue to improve. I actually did some work comp analysis here. Here's another site. They asked me to come in and take a look. I think I actually had some students do some work here as well. I reviewed their programs, talked about what I saw. I looked at their records, both OSHA record keeping and work comp. And then I have the pictures of the issues I found. I gave some of the actual language from the standards, pointing out the issues. And of course, I was talking to them as we walked through. This is more of something they can go back and reference since I'm not there. And it's a lot of, these are pretty good pictures. Yeah, I had some videos, but I can't show them on here. A video on a video just doesn't work. I talked about some solutions they could pursue, and gave them a summary and closing contents. This is the report I gave them. So if you want to see what an actual written report looks like, you can look at this. It goes along with the GLC mock audit. Later on, I did one at this site. They had 3 sites. I talked about what I reviewed. Again, the issues, I think you're going to find out that the issues I find tend to be similar in a lot of these areas, but I'm not sure if they match up with the most frequently cited standards or not. Maybe I should actually start compiling my own list. But just as a former OSHA inspector, there's certain things I look for and certain things I see, and I see them pretty consistently, and so I cite them. And I also get into things outside of safety. So this would be more of a EPA or hazardous material. And here's the citation summary and some recommendations. Another site I went to. I gave a summary here, overall impression. So I've gotten into this, I've adopted this boilerplate for the presentation. It seems to work good for me. And what I'm doing is I'm educating the employer, not only what I found, but what they need to be doing. And again, we get to the pictures, we get to the items, and I always just try to provide them with support. Again, this is so they can handle it on their own when I'm not there. Here's my summary and the recommendations. And the last one I want to show you here. Again, you see I've got the summary, overall impression, my records review and results, my methods, and then we get into the pictures, the issues, the language of the law. And this is all meant just to give them something to work from. And then the report I write that goes along with these presentations becomes the beginning of a safety program. Again, a safety program is earned through the steps of auditing, come up with corrective actions. I've done the audit, I make recommendations for corrective actions, and then they do the work, and then we would sit down and go over it again. What's the goal of this one? Well, how did we do? What's the next thing we work on? That's what I've been doing with all these clients, and I try to bring in students to do some of that extra work, because then my students get hands-on experience. They get to experience what it's like to develop a safety program. Oh, in this case, again, environmental. So I saw engine and auto liquids on the parking surfaces. And so I asked, do you have an industrial stormwater permit? And he looked at me like, what is that? So I looked them up, and they're a Tier 2 facility, and indeed, they need to, and I gave them information in their report on who they need to contact in their area to pursue that. And then there were a few case studies in just the last 2 years based on something I something I observed while I was watching watching them do their business. And so my recommendations were based on similar incidents. I give them the summary table, and then my recommendations on what they should be working on. So and I'm going to also show you that when I worked at the state, I evaluated years and years of injury data. And here I've got 2,676 cases. And what I did is I just really analyzed the data and had that guide me to what needed to be evaluated, the next step, what's most important. As you can see, these RCTs are the most important. That they have a nice Pareto ratio here. If you look at it from a cause perspective, these 4 causes tend to be the primary causes. Again, they're like the 80%, the Pareto ratio. And then I looked at it just for those RCTs and what were the causes. And the actual injury data has pointed some things out that maybe I wouldn't have actually observed if I had done a hazard audit, but rather these are behavioral things. These don't always occur. The risk is there. And by knowing that, then we can start focusing on ways in which we can limit the exposures or limit the severity of an outcome. And so that's what I did. And the final one is my tracking mechanisms. So I trained the work comp coordinators to track all of the 300 logs. And then on a quarterly basis, they'd send me their data, and I would evaluate the rates of different types of injuries. And then I track them over time just to see how they were doing. And, I would report back to the site safety people and to site management. And then whatever the numbers were, like this was an initiative because it's going out of its trend. It's not going down, it's going up. And in doing so, we're trying to kind of head it off at the curve. We're trying to get things to all come down. And for the most part, we did that. But as you saw, there were a few things that kind of jumped up. But by monitoring it, overall, things tended to be going down, and we started asking questions maybe we may not have answered prior to having this type of information. And so the injury data, the work comp data, all that stuff can help us guide us to the right places to ask questions or to institute job hazard analyses or whatever in-depth study we need to really understand what's been going on. So that's all I wanted to cover for this particular lecture. Please complete the quiz. This is based again on lecture 6. There'll be no quiz based on this particular lecture. We'll be having a guest speaker next and additional guest speakers coming up. So contact me if you have any questions.